Hello, welcome to Solving Watercolor. Today I'm going to be looking at one of my subscribers' paintings who wrote to me saying, "Hi Andy, please can you help me with this painting? It's my second attempt and I'm struggling with everything, but especially the mid and foregrounds. I resorted to watercolor pencils in the end, but really wanted to paint them. Any advice would be very welcome. PS, I used Bockingford £140 knot, Cotman watercolor paints, Faber-Castell watercolor pencils, assorted brushes and a ruling pen. I've also attached the photo I used, which we can see here. So thanks for sending me your work, Ruth. You've done a great job getting the overall shape of the tree, and I like the way you've used wet in wet on the background, which gives depth, and you've also made those background trees quite distinct from the foreground by making them blue, which is great as it creates the illusion of atmospheric perspective where objects in the distance tend to get more blue as they get further away. Now, first thing I notice is we have a wintry scene here, we can tell, because obviously the tree has shed its leaves. Personally, I would have gone with a more muted, cooler colour palette to reflect the season. Your greens and browns are quite warm and bright, which is perhaps more indicative of a summer scene rather than a winter one. Now, trees are deceptively tricky to paint because everyone knows what a tree should look like, so when it's not quite right, the viewer just instinctively knows it, even if they're not quite sure what's wrong. So one bit of advice I've got for you here is be careful when you're painting trees that you don't have thick branches extending from thinner ones, or starting thin and then getting thicker. A branch tends to stay roughly the same thickness all along its length until it splits into two thinner branches, which in turn stay the same thickness until they split into thinner ones, and so on. Okay, now, so you asked for some help with the background and the foreground. So generally, I don't try and give equal weight to everything in a scene. My advice would be to put a bit more detail in the areas that you want people to look at and simplify the less important areas. As a general piece of advice here, I would try and paint everything with as few brush strokes as possible. Use the appropriate brush size that will allow you to cover the largest amount of paper with the least amount of brushing. Watercolor tends to look fresher and more appealing the less brushing you actually do. So I think maybe the problem you had here was that you tried to do a bit too much, and the watercolor pencils have maybe caused the painting to look a bit laboured and overworked. But the good news is I can see you have a great eye for detail, so maybe it's just a case of pulling it back a bit and just trying to simplify things, do less rather than more. Here's how I would approach a similar scene, and I'm not trying to say this is the right way to do it, it's just how I would have done it. So my plan for this painting is to start off with the background and just keep it very loose, and I'm putting in some sky with the Hake brush here, so there's a little bit of weak ultramarine blue along with some burnt sienna just to put a bit of warmth into the sky, and it's really just an indication of the sky. I'm not even going to really paint the whole thing. And I'm going to continue down now to the background trees, which are a blue-grey mixed from ultramarine, Payne's grey, and just a small touch of violet in there to warm it up slightly. I'm just painting into the bead of those background trees now with some green, which I've mixed from New Gamboge and ultramarine. I'm just going to let that blend together. I'm just trying to avoid creating too many hard edges in my background here. I want a kind of hazy, impressionistic, loose background. And so I'm just going to carry on moving down. The next thing I'm going to do is just do that small puddle that's in front of the tree. The puddle will reflect the background trees and sky to some extent, and some of the ground colour just ran into it, and that's okay. I didn't really intend to do that, but let's just call it a happy accident, as it actually looks like a watery reflection. So nice, okay, I'll just go along with that. Just add a little touch more to the sky. Okay, so now I've got my very loose, abstract looking background, and I'm just going to dry that off. And that's really all I need. I'll just keep it simple. So I'm using a small flat brush now, a 1/4 inch flat brush, and I've made a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt umber. That creates a nice warm neutral for my tree, and it just pulls it back from being that kind of warm chocolatey brown, which a lot of people use for trees, but it doesn't really look that natural. And I'm painting the trunk by pulling down with my flat brush towards myself rather than painting away from myself, because the brush is easy to control if you can just pull it towards yourself. And I'm adding in the thicker branches by turning the flat brush on its edge. I'm going to switch to the rigger in a minute for the really thin branches, but before I do that I'm going to put the reflection of the tree into the puddle. There's a small bead of wet paint at the base of the tree, so I can use that to my advantage by taking the wet flat brush and just painting a stroke of clean water up into that bead, and the paint will then just flow into it, making a nice watery reflection for me, and without me having to do very much. I love it when watercolour just kind of paints itself like that. Just going to lift out a little bit of that colour just to make the reflection a bit paler than the actual colour of the tree. And now I'm switching over to the rigger, and I'm just going to put in those thin spidery branches just to finish off the tree there. But just to really finish it off and give the tree trunk a bit of texture, I'm going to pull out some colour from it with my damp flat brush and just wipe off the excess colour onto a paper towel and paint into it again with some clean water, pull out a bit more colour, and it just creates a bit of texture and tonal variation on the tree, which just really brings it to life. And the final touch then is just to turn my rigger on its edge and paint in some dark spots here and there, and that's the tree. I'll call that done.